Growing up, I was always drawn to adrenaline, extremity, and testing my limits. I started out doing relatively common stuff: bungee jumping, parachuting, mountain climbing, but like a junkie needing a greater high, I always wanted something more. I gathered a group of like-minded friends through my adventuring. There were 5 of us: 2 girls named Katie and Lena, 2 guys called David and Jake, and me, Adam, together. We moved on to more dangerous activities: base jumping, cave diving, things like that. 3 years ago, we had what we thought was a great idea. We would ski to the South Pole. It didn't take long for us to agree on this trip. Only Lena was against it, not liking the remoteness of the continent, but it didn't take much for us to persuade her. Soon, we were all planning, saving up money and researching. On November 6th, we stepped off a hired plane at Hercules Inlet, a bay in the southwest of Antarctica, and the beginning point of our 50-day ski trek. Waiting for us was our guide, Leif Steenson. Jake had picked Leif personally. He had been recommended by one of Jake's traveler friends, who had also hired the Norwegian as a guide on an Antarctica trip. He struck me as a gruff, silent man. "Hey there," Jake called out as we approached him, hauling our packs and skis behind us. "You must be Leif, right?" "Yes," he answered curtly. His voice was heavily accented. "And you are Jake?" "The very same." My friend smiled. He was a likable and friendly guy. In stark contrast to Leif's disconnected manner, we made our introductions, and our guide immediately got down to business. "There are a few basic rules you must follow. In order to stay safe, obey my commands at all times. Do not wander off from the party. Do not walk away from camp." "Will we get a handbook?" Katie laughed. She was the joker of our group. Leif looked at her icily. No handbook. You remember, or you don't go at all." Katie stopped laughing quick. After Leif had finished his briefing, we set out at last. I can't even begin to describe the scenery. Nothing I've ever seen quite compares to it. Flat, endless ice sheets, spreading out as far as the eye could see, like a sea of snow. It was undeniably beautiful. It also pressed home the reality that we were alone out here, with no humans for possibly hundreds of miles. If anything were to go wrong on this trip, it could be deadly. I loved every second of it. As we skied northeast, I strayed out of line and fell in beside David. He was the most like Leif among our group, quiet and reserved, at least until he got to know people. "So, when are you going to ask Leif out?" I grinned at him. "Shut the fuck up, Adam." He laughed back at me. I will say, though, that the way he shut up Katie was glorious. Wish more people could do that. Katie shot us a withering glare from in front of us. We both sniggered. Not like there's many coffee shops out here. "Anyway," I sighed, "your date will have to wait some time, it seems." After some hours of traveling northeast, Leif's voice carried over to us from the front of the column. "We stop here for now. Unpack your tents." As we took off our skis and began setting up camp, I wandered over to Lena. "So, how do you like it so far?" I said. "It's beautiful here. I'll give you that," Lena answered. "But like I said before, it's so barren, so massive. I can't help but feel small and meaningless, like a fly on a wall." "I'm sure you'll be fine," I said, putting a hand on her shoulder. "In a month, we'll reach the Thiel Mountains. That should break the monotony a bit." Lena was about to answer, but then stopped, squinting over my shoulder at something in the distance. "What's that, Adam?" I turned, looking out over the expanse of snow. "What?" "I can't see any." I finally noticed what she was pointing out, far away on the horizon. Something was sticking out of the ice, gray and unmoving. It was too far away to tell what it could possibly be. I called over to our guide. "Hey Leif, you got a second?" He came over to us, his bearded face stern, as always. "Yes, what is it, Adam?" "Any idea what that is?" I said, pointing to the faraway objects. He stroked his beard in thought. "I do not know," he said finally. "Rocks, perhaps." "It's roughly in the way we're going," said Jake, walking over from his pack. He smiled winningly. "Maybe we could check it out tomorrow. What do you think, Leif? Up for an adventure?" Leif seemed uncomfortable with the suggestion. "I don't know if that's a good idea. We need to keep up a good pace." "Jake's right. It's roughly the way we're going." "Anyway," said Lena, "come on, it may be something interesting." Leif sighed. "Fine, tomorrow, probably just rocks, I would say." My first night in Antarctica was sobering. Even in my tent, dressed up warmly and in a special sleeping bag, I could feel the cold. Thankfully, after some time my breathing warmed up the tent, and I fell into a deep sleep. 8 hours later, Leif woke us to break camp and set out again. As I was eating a small breakfast of freeze-dried cheese and chocolate, I saw Katie looking at the gray objects on the horizon. She looked strangely confused. "What's up, Katie?" I asked, walking over. "Slept well. Those things, weren't they to the north when we set up camp?" She answered. I frowned, trying to remember. "I think so, yeah. Why? They're to the east now," Katie said. I paused, confused. "Are you sure you didn't get turned around?" No. I checked my compass. "It's definitely to the west." I frowned again. "I guess we misremembered, then. We were all tired, after all." "Yeah, must have been that," Katie said absently, her mind elsewhere. "Wonder what those things are. Anyway, guess we'll find out soon enough." After eating and packing up, we put on our skies and set out, heading towards the strange things on the horizon. Leif seemed slightly troubled, and I wondered if he too had misremembered the direction they were in. As we got closer, we could make out what the things were. A circle of massive rectangular stones, standing on their side. They reminded me instantly of Stonehenge. Approaching them, David fell in beside Leif. "I thought Antarctica never had an indigenous population," he said. "Who could have made something like this?" Our guide appeared perplexed. "I will be honest with you. I do not know. I've never seen anything quite like this before." "I thought you'd been through these parts of the continent before," said Lena. "I have, but I did not encounter this. It is irregular. We should take a closer look." Katie grinned back at our guide. "Good to see you've warmed to our little adventure, Leif." We approached the circle cautiously. Up close, we could see that the stones had once had carvings of some sort on them, although they had long been destroyed by time and wind. In the center of the circle was a low, square slab of stone. 4 grooves ran from its center to each corner. "What the hell?" whispered Lena. "How did this even get here?" "Aliens," smiled Katie. "Isn't that always the answer?" I walked over to the central stone. It was dark, about knee height, and featureless. For some reason, it made me strangely uneasy, although I couldn't pinpoint why. I touched it hesitantly. It was completely smooth, unlike the rest of the circle. "We should continue," Leif called out. "We have a timetable to fulfill. We can write down the coordinates and, once we return, tell someone who will know what to do with this discovery." Slowly, our group pulled back together, and we set out again. The expanse stretched out around us, completely featureless, and I was glad we had an experienced guide like Leif. Every so often, he would take out a compass and check our heading, making slight adjustments every time. I slept better on our second stop, knowing that the cold would get better eventually. I talked with Lena before I went to bed, and she confessed that the stone circle had made her feel uneasy as well. "It shouldn't be here," she said firmly. "This place hasn't had any native people, ever. It's only scientists and tourists, and why would they possibly make something like this?" Maybe Katie's right. I smiled. "Aliens," Lena groaned theatrically. "You're all underestimating how important this discovery could be. Maybe we've accidentally stumbled on proof that the history of this continent was completely different." "I hope not. I don't want my name in a history book being my legacy." We both laughed, the unease of the situation relenting somewhat. When I woke, I could tell something was wrong. I could hear hushed voices talking outside my tent. I climbed outside, rubbing my gritty eyes. Leif, Lena, David, Katie, and Jake stood in a huddle in the middle of our campsite. They were talking quietly and casting furtive glances to the west. I looked over to where they were looking. On the horizon, far away, I could see a familiar circle of gray stones. A chill ran down my spine. I walked over to my friends. "How is this possible?" I asked incredulously. "Those things should be to the south of us. They shouldn't even be close enough for us to see them." Leif silenced me with a gesture. "We have been talking about it, Adam. The only logical explanation is that this is a second circle. It is strange, to say the least. I have never heard of a stone circle in Antarctica, let alone 2. "Do we go investigate it?" asked Lena. "No," replied Leif resolutely. "Yesterday's detour already put us off our timetable. We must press on. I will write down these coordinates, and we will pass them on to the experts later." We packed up and set off. A strange hush had fallen on our group. The second circle had affected us strangely. I could tell the others were disconcerted by them now. Not just me and Lena. During the day's hike, I only talked once, with Katie. I was hoping her joking attitude would help me relax. "So, aliens, huh?" I said, skiing next to her. "That a professional opinion." She grinned at me, but I could tell she was troubled. "It's obvious, isn't it?" she answered jokingly. "What else would it be? Maybe Leif put them there to scare us," I suggested. "Did you see him looking at them? He was confused too," Katie said, suddenly serious. "And he's been through here before. How come he didn't see it?" "Maybe it was snowed under," I suggested. "I've read that the landscape can change a lot here." Our conversation trailed off, and we remained silent till we broke camp again. Before I went to sleep, I noticed David scanning the horizon. It was a clear day, and we could see miles away. "What you looking at?" I asked, walking over to him. "Snow and ice. I'm making sure there's no bloody stone circles around here," David replied. I laughed, but he didn't join in. I went to bed, once again feeling uneasy. A commotion in the camp awoke me suddenly. I tore out of my tent, not even getting out of my sleeping gear. David was shouting, cursing. "What's happening? What's going on?" I yelled. David stood on the edge of our camp, gesticulating wildly at the western horizon. My heart missed a beat as I saw what he was cursing at. A circle of gray rocks. My friends came out of their tents, confused and sleepy. Their confusion quickly turned to an uncertain fear. "How is this possible?" Lena asked. "I don't know," answered Leif. Even he seemed troubled, and he kept checking his compass, as if confirming over and over that the rocks were indeed in that direction. I was about to suggest we go investigate, but David cut me off. "Where's Katie?" We stood in silence for a second, turning, looking around. Leif ran over to Katie's tent and unzipped it. It was empty. Not even her sleeping bag remained. Our group fell quiet for a second. No one knew what to say, what to do. Leif broke the silence. "There are footprints here." Looking closer, I saw he was right. Booted footprints were impressed in the snow, going from the tent entrance, around it and away from the camp. We followed after them. Soon, Lena threw her hands up in frustration. "What the fuck?" she exclaimed. "What the fuck is going on?" Peering past her, I could see what had angered her. The footprints stopped, suddenly and without any warning. It was as if Katie had suddenly flown straight up into the air. We gathered around the place they ended. Jake cleared his throat. "Leif," he began. "What's the plan, man? What's our next move?" Leif was silent for a second, staring at the abruptly ending footprints. Then he looked at Jake. "We have to search for her. She has to be here somewhere. We will spread out into a line and..." He trailed off as something on the ground caught his eye. I looked down. Our movement had upset the snow, showing ice beneath. It was oddly clear, almost like frozen glass. Through it, we could see something red. A piece of fabric, frozen deep below the surface. Leif cleared his throat audibly. "Clear the snow below us." We set to work, moving the snow with our gloved hands. Soon, we could see what lay below. Jake cursed savagely, and Leif crossed himself. My breath stopped short as I realized what I was seeing. Frozen solid in the ice below, lying in her bag as if she was still asleep, was Katie.